Our next Real Food Summit presenter is John Wood. The title of John's presentation is When Animals Eat Right, You Do Too. John Wood is a lifelong resident of Lewis County, Missouri. Following a farm operations BS degree at Iowa State University in 1975, John returned back to a fifth-generation family farm and was involved in day-to-day management of a conventional Northeast Missouri family farm from 1975 to 2000. In February 2000, John and three partners created a pasture-to-consumer online grass-fed meat business, creating solar dollars on a farm near Canton, Missouri. Grassland Beef, LLC, also known as U.S. Wellness Meats, was organized officially on September 1st, 2000. Marketing commenced on November 7, 2000, and continues today nationwide and into several foreign countries. Grass-fed beef, lamb, butter, cheese, bison, free-range poultry, compassion-raised pork, organic snacks, wild-caught seafood, raw honey, and gourmet rabbit compose the core business model. U.S. Wellness Meats have been featured by restaurant chefs, doctors, trainers, authors, and the likes of Fox News in recent years. It is exciting for John and U.S. Wellness Meats to be in an industry that supports animal agriculture, treats animals with respect, allows entry positions for young farmers with low overhead, good for the land and plant community, good for the rural community, and improves health and wellness for their consumers. John Wood, welcome to the Real Food Summit.
Sean, honored to be part of your new Real Food Summit. It's going to be an exciting time.
Yes, it's going to be very exciting. I'm very excited about your presentation topic. You're talking about why it's important for animals to eat what they're supposed to eat and the impact that has on us, the people who eat them. And so my first question for you is, how is a grazing diet different from a grain or starch diet for cows, lambs, bison, dairy products from grass-fed cows?
Well, first of all, our slogan is "Our animals eat right, so you can too," and it's very, very simple. Our animals eat right, so you can too. Repeating, and what makes this quite different is you roll the clock back. Let's roll the clock back 1,000 years ago, and man at that time was harvesting strictly grass-fed meat. I mean, either wild game or domesticated animals, and nobody knew at that time the health benefits of the pure grazing animal. And then after World War II came along, we had a surplus of nitrogen left over in this country from making weapons, making bombs, and the War Department contacted the Agricultural Department, and they decided that they could put this excess nitrogen out on cropland. And what happened from about 1946 to 1950, the corn yield in the United States literally doubled. And by 1951 or 52, the farmers were complaining about low prices, and they had this glut of corn, and there was just too much of a good thing. So then the next step in that chain was the Department of Agriculture trying to decide how to best get rid of all this excess grain, and they decided that a cow or a feedlot steer, which is what it's called now, could consume about 25 pounds of corn a day, and it was a good way to get rid of this excess corn. Chickens eat fractions of a pound a day, and pigs will eat 2 or 3 pounds a day, but the 1,000-pound animal can utilize a lot of corn. So what happened was there was another paradigm shift. Then from the mid-1950s up to about 1970, over a 15-year span of time, we took this industry from the infancy to literally everything that we consumed from about 1970 on was a grain-fed animal. At the time, we had no concept what really was going on nutritionally, and the major change, the take-home bullet point is that the grazing animal operates a stomach at pH 7, neutral. The animal that has a high starch diet or a heavy grain diet will run a pH of 4, 4.5 to 5, very acidic. And guess what? The bacteria that ferment in the first stomach, the cow's got 4 stomachs. The first chamber is fermentation, abomasum, reticulum, and small intestine, the next 3 down the line. And what happens in that fermentation chamber is the bacteria that ferment at pH 7, they all die off at pH 5. So you have a completely different family of bacteria to do the fermentation. Well, the fermentation sets up the table for the end products, the volatile fatty acids, which ends up in your lipid chain at the end when you buy the steak or the ground beef. And what we didn't realize at the time was that if you go back to 1900, we had, at the turn of the century, less than 2% of the population was diabetic. Cancer was very, very rare. Heart disease was very rare. In fact, they didn't even discuss it in medical schools until about the 1920s, when we made some changes to the grain that we eat and the bread that we eat due to some changes made by the Cargill Corporation on wheat. And slowly but surely, we made some rather dramatic changes in the 20th century on human diet. But getting back to this animal again, we have a grazing animal which God set up and operated for 1.7 or 8 million years while we've been walking upright. And we've actually, we had a perfect ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. We had about a 2-to-1 ratio omega-6 to omega-3, fish and chickens, 3-to-1. And the grain-fed animal, which we just discussed with a low pH, has got a ratio of about 18 or 20 bad guys to 1 good guy. And that's the huge difference. And omega-6s are inflammatory, omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. And we get around high-performance athletes that really know their body better than most normal people do, and they'll tell you after competition that in training that the first thing they see is fewer aches and pains, because omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. Not how much stronger I am, just the fact that I don't have the aches and pains I used to have. And then the other unique feature is CLA, which is a term many of your listeners probably haven't heard, but CLA stands for conjugated linoleic acid. This is a very unique compound discovered in the 1980s by Dr. Mike Pariza at the University of Wisconsin. He was looking to prove or disprove the theory that charcoal broiling could set up cancer in humans. There was concern about some of the effects of the charcoal. What he discovered was something in red meat was slowing the growth of tumors he was trying to raise, which was exactly the last thing that he was hoping to discover. And a year and a half later, he discovered a compound in red meat called conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA for short. And CLA is probably one of the number one foods you can consume to slow down the onset of cancer and actually fight cancer. And J.D. Searle, Merck, and Pfizer have tried for 30-some-odd years to make it synthetically and keep it stable, and the problem is you can make it in the lab, but it's not a stable compound, and usually after several weeks it will oxidize and lose its strength. So the only really good way to get it is grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, grass-fed bison, and grass-fed dairy products, butter and cheese. And actually the dairy products actually have higher isomers for the cancer fight, and the grass-fed meats, beef and lamb and bison, actually have the isomers that actually promote lean muscle development and fat reduction, which is quite unique. There was a study done at Iowa State in the 1999-2000 winter that actually demonstrated that pigs on a high CLA diet, which have the same stomach as humans, they actually had 25% less back fat and I think a 5 or 10% larger loin eye. So they were leaner and had much better muscle mass. Also, CLA is a polyunsaturated fat, very, very good for the circulatory system, and it actually has properties to slow the onset of diabetes. So in a nutshell, the grazing animal is dramatically healthier from the standpoint of human health, and we've known this for about 1.7 million years and didn't even realize it. And there's a movie out called The Perfect Human Diet, which was just introduced here back in February 2012, and it takes into account some of these issues. It's a good one to kind of pick up on. But we literally ate a paleo, high-fat, high-protein diet up until the turn of the 20th century. Then we started adding a lot of carbohydrates and starches, and the end result has been a decline in human health. And by the turn of year 2000, we have a runaway epidemic of diabetes, runaway epidemics of cancer and heart disease, and these are all, in my opinion, a factor of the human diet we experimented with for the last 100 years, and it hasn't been a good thing.
John, let's get back to the CLA. What thoughts go through your head when you hear another news report that red meat causes cancer?
I just kind of chuckled because, I've heard it too many times, and I do know that they are referring to the commodity product, and I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap. But I do know that when you have a product that is enriched with CLA about 400 times more than the commodity product, the problem is with CLA, it takes chlorophyll, green plants, green pigments to actually create the CLA. And in a grain diet, those animals are on mama's milk. All these animals are on mama's milk and grass up to about 6 or 7 or 750 pounds. And then the animals on the grain diet go into the commercial feedlot, and they spend about 140 days there. And at really high grain diet, what happens when you change the pH in the first stomach, in about 30 days, a lot of the accumulated CLA and omega-3s that animal's put on place while it was on mama's milk and grass, you will actually drop those out of the profile, and you'll add in omega-6s in great numbers. So even though it was on grass early in its life, you lose most of that benefit. And that's what people need to understand with grass-fed beef. If you're buying it from a farmer who's had it on grass and thinks the last 2 or 3 weeks he needs to put some grain into the diet to make it taste better, you want to stay away, because basically you can literally run 30 days of grain at the end of the feeding period or the grazing period will ruin all that 200 days of sunshine and green grass. So you have to have the green chlorophyll in the plants in order to manufacture CLA. And when you're on a high CLA diet, cancer is the last thing that's in my mind.
I spoke a little bit with Joel Salatin regarding the importance of the soil. Can you talk about how grazing affects the agricultural land?
It's quite a unique question. In fact, I have a good friend. His name is Alan Savory. He's the author of Holistic Resource Management. He's about 82 or 3. He's actually kind of the pioneer that got me into the grass-fed business. I read his book back in 1993. Read it again a couple of years later. And he makes the claim in front of the House of Lords in London, I guess in February of 2011, and not very many commoners get to address that body. And they had him address the issue of global warming. And I tell you how important grasslands are. His profound statement was, as we diminish the grasslands on the planet is going to warm. And he doesn't blame it on carbon, carbon fuels and burning coal plants and burning crude oil for power. He blames the whole problem on global warming on a lack of grasslands. A pretty profound statement. In fact, the SavoryInstitute.org is a fascinating website. This guy is a genius. But when you have grasslands that are productive, well managed, you have the perfect ecosystem. In the summer of 2011, I've got a farm here in northeast Missouri. We had a record rainfall for the month of June, so they've been keeping records. I mean, it really rained 15 or 20 inches in the month of June. Just horrific rains, one week after the other. And the farm that I have has several large lakes, we call them watershed lakes, or kind of flood control structures to the Mississippi River. Not once did those lakes ever overfill to the emergency spillway. Every other lake in the county did. But I was able to catch and maintain that rainfall, slow down the runoff with the grass plants. The root systems are very, very active, very deep in the soil due to my management. And I was able to maintain the composure of that piece of property, had hardly any soil loss compared to my neighbors who had horrendous soil losses with open cropland. But the grazing community, what we try to do, if you can picture your listeners in the room that they're sitting in, or say they're in the car they're driving in, if you broke the floor up into like 30 different individual equal-sized pieces, and each one of those represents a day of the month. The animals go to square one on day one, and 30 days later they've exited the system, and now they're coming back to square one again. And you can imagine what your lawn will look like if you mowed it once every 30 days, and that is what we're doing here. And by giving the plant community a chance to rest, and to regenerate its roots and to go deeper in the soil profile, we just create soil health. And after 10 years of doing this, we now have 3 times or 4 times as much grass off the same amount of real estate. It's been amazing to watch the process. You won't believe it until you do it. And our limitation is usually about having enough animals on the property. But the ecosystem there is much more refined. And the beauty of having grass on the landscape, and you've got to have some, row crop production in this country to feed the world. And there's really 2 models that's got to be employed here. I think 30% of the population will purchase healthier choices given the choice. And with the income, higher income levels, they can afford to eat smarter. And there's still half the population that's going to consume whatever's the cheapest, whatever will fulfill their urges at the least amount of money. And so you really have to have 2 models. But the grazing model, you've got much better, obviously you're catching sunlight 12 months out of the year. In the cropland, you're catching sunlight really for about 100 days out of the year when the annual crops are growing. And in the grazing community, you're catching sunlight 12 months out of the year. Even in the wintertime, you actually get a little bit of minimal grass growth in North Missouri. It's kind of hard to measure, but still the photosynthesis process can go when there's not snow cover. So you've got very minimal soil loss. You've got a much healthier biology. The top 12 inches of the soil profile is full of fungi and actinomycetes and mycorrhizal fungi. And all these critters, what they're doing is they're actually helping the plant secure carbon from the atmosphere and putting it back in the soil. My carbon levels are much higher than neighboring properties just because we are sequestering carbon.
You talked a bit earlier about having a high CLA and high omega-3 diet. What are some more of the long-term effects of that type of diet?
Well, Sean, the most important ingredient here is the word longevity. You're going to age much more slowly than the person consuming a low CLA, low omega-3, high omega-6 diet. Omega-3s are anti-inflammatory, and inflammation is really aging. As you age your cells, it's inflammatory, active ingredients that actually cause harm to the body. CLA is this beautiful compound made by Mother Nature. It slows down, diabetes if you have a history of that in the family. It slows down, the cancer. We all have a few stray cancer cells. The CLA actually will nix some of those before they get to be a problem, slow down that process. It's a polyunsaturated fat. It's good for the circulatory system. It's just beautiful stuff. It's one of the best things Mother Nature has created. So I actually have looked at, photographs. I think I'm now 59 years of age. And I think if you look at photographs of my face and take a look at me 10 years ago at age 49, really when I kind of got into this thing, I think I actually look younger today than I did 10 years ago. It's kind of a profound statement, but I really intend to water ski on my 100th birthday is one of my goals. And, I think 120 is if we maintain a good diet, maintain proper hydration, I think we can have a productive life for a much longer period of time. But it's all about disciplining yourself, and our animals eat right, so you can too.
That's so funny. Before we started up our call, I looked at your headshot and I was like, John looks good. He looks real good. It's like that grass-fed meat. Hey, man, we opened up the Real Food Summit with Joel Salatin, and his presentation was called Real Food Defined. And I asked Joel, what should we be looking for? Natural, grass-fed, grass-finished? And he is a big proponent of grass finish. He says that's what we should be looking for. However, I feel like our audience may be a little bit confused right now because you and I have been talking about grass fed. And so is there any difference in your opinion? What should we be looking for?
Well, it's a very confusing issue, and sadly, up until 2005, Joel Salatin would have commented grass-fed. In October 2005, USDA, under some pressure from some of the major food corporations, which that's in my personal opinion, the terminology changed. USDA literally waded in like the 800-pound gorilla, and they changed the terminology. Up until October 2005, grass-fed meant mama's milk and grass all the way to slaughter. They changed that to the term grass finished after 2005, and technically that means it's been on a high, been on a grazing diet, I think, for a minimum of 140 days prior to slaughter, which essentially, if you're in the animal world, a calf is born, it's on mama's milk and grass, so it weighs 600 pounds or so, or 700 or 800 pounds, and then most animals go to a commercial feedlot. And the grazing animal continues to eat grass, and it takes twice as long to get a grazing animal to finished weight just because it doesn't gain as fast on grass as grain. So when we answer the phone in the office, my customer service staff will tell you that it's grass-fed, grass-finished, because part of the population still understands the old rules. In fact, most people probably think grass-fed is the appropriate term, and some folks who really studied their lesson will understand the word grass-finished, and it's just a sad chain of events. And I think the real important issue is to get to know your farmer. Everyone does this a little bit differently. Joel Salatin's technique and his pasture management is probably differently than mine, but I think the take-home here is get a personal relationship with the people that raise your food, whether it's vegetables, whether it's pork, whether it's beef, whether it's dairy, and then you need to understand what they do, why they do it, so you're really comfortable with what you're purchasing. And we gave a tour this past week to Bill Staley and Haley Mason of the Primal Pallet folks, and they came out in the country and actually had a great time for a day and a half, and we showed them the farms and the cattle and what we do, and had a cookout. I mean, they just took some wonderful pictures, some wonderful video, and they really understand what we do and why we do it. But I think that's the take-home, is that you just need to understand who's producing your food and why they do it and how they do it. And to me, that's the most important piece of the puzzle.
We're about to transition into another topic. We're going to talk about chicken, but even with chickens, I feel like we should clarify the terminology a bit. We're going to talk about free-range chickens, but there's also talk that pastured chickens are what we should be looking for, and that free-range chickens doesn't really mean a whole lot. So can you clarify that for us as well?
Well, there again, it's a terminology issue again, and technically a free-range chicken, spends, half of its life out on the land, and chickens are animals that are very, very tasty from foxes and other predators, and so most chickens are actually confined at night so that they will survive for the next day. Pastured chickens, what we try to produce here is pastured chickens. These animals are out have access to grass, and what they should be getting, in my opinion, a true free-range chicken. And our original producer is a farmer down in South Carolina. I've been on his property. He's been doing this for probably 25 years, but the general rule is a chicken should consume almost half of its diet from the land. And these birds have got to be moved into fresh grass about every 24 hours. And it's amazing what they'll consume. They'll take the clovers, they'll take the grass, the blades of grass, and they'll pick up any bug or insect that happens to be in its way. And they're very quick at that. And it's also very good for the land. The byproduct of free range or pasture chickens is you have a very, very fertile pasture, because every day they do their thing and they drop their droppings and they eat the grass and away they go. So, and then flavor. And when you're getting into the true free range chicken, the animal's getting part of that diet off the land. You will, as my father says, this tastes like chickens that I had 70 years ago. My father's 89, and I gave him the first free range chicken probably we produced. In fact, one of our members in the meat company was producing free-range chickens here, and he said, that's the best chicken I've had in about 50 years or 60 years. He recognized the flavor of it. So, there again, it gets back to know your chickens and know your producers, and the properly raised chicken, is going to be a much better tasting chicken.
So, John, how do free-range chickens differ from the commodity chickens that I might find at every grocery store in America?
This is a great story. We've got a free-range producer in eastern Oklahoma doing these GMO-free birds, and he had a chef on his property. This was probably 6 months ago, and they had a film crew out filming the chickens and filming what he does. And this gentleman had brought a commodity chicken, probably produced by one or two or three of the large commodity chicken producers. And then he had one of these free-range chickens, and he had a TV crew there and had a kitchen set up. And he took a really sharp butcher knife and he just punctured, the chicken, the commodity chicken, and literally, I call it purge. This is the water. When the commodity chicken has been soaked in water, and they can add 12% body weight to the chicken by actually soaking it, chilling it in a what I call a common swimming pool. They'll put 1,000 birds into one large tank of really cold water. And then they've got several techniques. They can inject these birds with some phosphorus and some things of that nature to hold the water in the bird. But what happens is you have this chicken that's literally just puffed up with all this embedded water. And this guy stuck the knife in this chicken with TV cameras running, and this 2 or 3 feet stream of water just shoots out the top of this chicken. I mean, it was quite dramatic. And he stuck the knife into the free-range chicken, nothing happened. These chickens that we sell have been chilled in crushed ice. And I've seen how they plastic tubs, and they put the freshly slaughtered chickens into the tub. They just take this crushed ice, and this room is like 33 degrees, so it's not going to melt, and they don't absorb any water, but they chill them quickly with that technique, and these birds are carrying no additional water. And so when you go to prepare the chicken, these chickens will have to be cooked a little bit differently. Maybe that's a different question, because this commodity chicken's got all this water in it, and anybody can cook one of those. It's just going to come out mush, because of all the embedded water. And why USDA allowed that, I do not know. And as a sidebar, they can now do it for beef. We do not do that whatsoever, but that's one of the tricks that the industry, the large corporate food producers in this country have learned to lobby government in a way to maximize. And you can imagine, you can add 12% weight by water to a chicken. Water's pretty inexpensive, and that's one of the ways they make a lot of money. And it's just, there's a dramatic difference. I was actually in a fancy hotel in New York City a couple of years ago. We were demonstrating grass-fed beef. The chef was a well-known chef in New York, and we had grass-fed chicken, grass-fed beef, and we were doing pastured pork. And the most dramatic, graphically, taste-wise, was chicken, because they had a commodity chicken, and this chicken looked bad before it was even cooked. I mean, it just looked like it had led a pretty tough life, and the free-range chickens looked much more robust sitting there on a platter. This chicken was prepared, and the flavor difference was just dramatic. I mean, there was just no comparison. Once you eat a free-range chicken that's been properly raised or pasture-raised, you'll never go back to commodity chicken. It's just so dramatic, and the health benefits are obviously there as well.
Yep, two completely different animals. Eggs are completely different as well. If you look at the color of the yolk, all you have to do is just really look at it. I've got a lot of emails from people who follow my radio show, and they say when they transition or when they switch from typical store-bought commercial chicken or beef, and they buy the good stuff, they have trouble cooking it. They notice that, you have to cook it a little bit differently. So do you have any cooking tips for people who, just started buying these types of better meats?
It's real simple. Like on the grass-fed beef side or the lamb side, number one is when you change the fat chemistry in beef, when you put these omega-6s, take the omega-6s out, replace with omega-3s, increase CLA, you've completely changed the lipid profile of that animal. The commodity product will cook under high heat conditions and not be damaged, just because the fat has better insulating properties. The grass-fed animal, the fats that you end up in this animal that are high in omega-3, high in CLA, they have less insulation property than commodity beef, and so you want to sear steaks, for example, sear them on both sides, turn the heat clear down to low or low medium, and let it cook under slower heat conditions, and you'll be rewarded by a very, very tender steak. If you take a take a 15-ounce ribeye grain-fed, 15-ounce ribeye grass-fed. You put them under high heat. When the grain-fed ribeye is medium rare, the grass-fed ribeye is well done. The usual mistake is overcooking grass-fed beef. Once you learn the cooking temperatures, you shouldn't have any trouble. The chicken is a little bit different. The chicken, for example, you take a whole free-range chicken, pasture-raised chicken, put that in a crock pot and walk off and leave it for 6 hours. It's just fork tender. I mean, it's under real slow, moist heat. It's just impossible to screw it up. If you're in a hurry over a barbecue grill or a skillet and you cook that free-range bird a little bit faster than what I would suggest you do it, you'll end up with a drier, tougher piece of meat just because you don't have that 12% water. Water is tenderness. So there again, sear the chicken, slow the heat down a little bit, and let it cook over a little longer period of time. And you can moisten it with clarified butter, anything like that, to kind of hold the moisture in. And once you get onto it, we've got some good recipes on the U.S. Wellness Meats website for chicken. But usually it's just the fact that and then some people aren't really used to a chicken that's got real muscles. That's just the problem is with a commercially raised broiler, they get very little exercise. The breast just, is their primary, they've been bred genetically to increase this breast weight dramatically. That's the most valuable cut. And so the legs can't support the weight, and so they get very little exercise. So the thighs and the drums off a commodity chicken are going to be far less underdeveloped than what a free-range chicken is or a pasture-raised chicken. But a little bit of practice. Go to our website. There are several good cookbooks out there now, that have come out in the last couple of years. Some great recipes. But I tell you one thing: for the poultry, for a whole chicken, the crock pot, it's just by far the simplest way to do it, and it's just amazing how good those things are.
You had a recent experience that kind of showed you the effects of feeding a non-GMO diet to young chickens. Do you mind sharing that with our attendees?
That's an interesting story. I was in this Oklahoma operation a couple of weeks ago, and it was quite intriguing because chickens, I was just amazed. They were showing me like 1-day-old chickens had just arrived, and they were showing me 3-day-old chickens and 7-day-old chickens. And it was just stunning how fast those baby chickens grow. But what was really interesting with the GMO-free diet, I think normally it takes like 7 days before the pin feathers or for the real feathers, come out on these new chickens. Well, the GMO-free diet, these birds were doing it in like 3 to 4 days. In other words, they were way ahead of schedule. And even in a very delicate, these things don't weigh more than 2 or 3 ounces when they hatch, and so it just another little bit of Mother Nature's proof that the GMO proteins in the finished ration of this corn ration actually had a negative effect on these birds. In fact, this guy was quite excited because he had fewer animals that died. He had faster performance, and the quicker they put their feathers on, the more insulation they have, so less heat it takes, and so it's just a win-win. He was quite surprised that that he could see with the naked eye in a matter of 5 days. He could see that these chickens were healthier and happier on the GMO-free diet.
Fascinating story. John, let's go ahead and wrap up. Do you have any closing comments for our Real Food Summit attendees?
Well, I'm honored to be a part of your summit, and I'm honored that people care enough about their longevity to take the time to learn. And I'll repeat again, our animals eat right, so you can too. And I think we need to roll the clock back and look at what our ancestors were doing. And I think the term ancestral health, the symposium coming up here at Harvard in August, is a very aptly appropriate term because our ancestors really were, true foodies, so to speak. They didn't realize it, but they all had their own gardens. They raised most of their own food. They weren't being filled full of the toxins that we pick up today in our food and in our environment. And so I look back at my grandfather, who was born in 1886, and another one in 1876. They were very healthy men, lived well up in their 90s. In fact, one of them almost made it to 100. But they were lean and lithe, and had a very high fat, high protein diet. So I commend you for what you're doing. I think you've been a great educational mentor for a lot of people, and I just tip my hat to what you've been able to do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Your website is uswellnessmeats.com. What will our attendees find when they go over there?
Well, we have a great selection. We have grass-fed beef, we have grass-fed lamb, we have the grass-fed bison, we have free-range chickens, we've got grass-fed dairy, butter, and cheese. We have some really good gourmet rabbits, which is a really interesting white meat for a lot of the folks with autistic kids. That rabbit has been a real popular item. We have a whole slew of snacks, healthy chocolates, healthy candy bars. We've gotten into a lot of organ sausages, the Braunschweigers, the liverwurst, the head cheese. We're making sliders now, breakfast sliders that are, all natural, very, very few seasonings. We have salt-free, or we have sugar-free bacon now, both beef and pork. And the one pork bacon that's been really popular, only thing we add to it is Celtic sea salt, which has been amazingly good. And so we've learned to simplify recipes, simplify ingredients. Snack sticks, pemmican bars. The pemmican bars now are smaller, round instead of rectangular. But we keep introducing new products, and we've had just a lot of fun doing it.
You have a newsletter as well, right?
That's correct. I would suggest anybody to go to uswellnessmeats.com and sign up for a weekly newsletter. We have a full-blown edition every other week, and we have a news alert in the off weeks, but we have 3 or 4 medical doctors, sports trainers, some really interesting people that contribute to that. And we're showing photographs of the farm. We have a couple of photos every week of the cattle in the pastures to give you an idea of what we really do. And so the newsletter's been a lot of fun, and that list has grown. And plus, we actually have on the newsletter weeks, which are every other week, we actually have a red letter code. It'll save 15% on your next order. It's good for like 72 hours, and that's been really popular on those on every other week. So the U.S. Wellness Newsletter can save you some money.
Fantastic. John Wood, thanks so much for being part of the Real Food Summit.
Thank you, Sean. Have a great day.
You too.